So, without further ado, let's get rolling. I'd like to first introduce the incredibly talented creative team that put this wonderful production all together. And if, when I introduce you, if you could just say hi and maybe a quick word. David Gordon, director and choreographer.
Hi, and a quick word to Denise Lucioni, who I see on the screen. Hi, Denise. She's in York.
And Jorge Cousineau, the video collaborator and editor.
That's me. Hi, everyone. Glad to be here.
Producer Alyce Dissette.
Hello.
And associate producer and performer Wally Cardona.
Hi, everyone.
And associate producer and performer Karen Graham. Is Karen here?
Yes.
Yep.
Oh, good. Can't see her on my screen, but.
You're still unmuted, Karen. I mean, you still.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes. Hi, Karen. And the project manager, Sarah Gladwin-Camp.
Hi, nice to see everybody today.
Great. First of all, congratulations. I was really blown away by this work. Somehow you managed to make a two-dimensional format seem three-dimensional. Initially, this production was supposed to be presented at the Christchurch Neighborhood House Theater, but 2020 came roaring in with a global pandemic. So David Gordon did what he always does. He invented a strategy to go around the obstacle and reimagined the work for the screen. Today, we're going to discuss three main topics: the auditions, the rehearsals, and putting it all together. I'll ask some questions to get things started, but there'll be some time at the end for those of you who are listening in to submit questions for the creative team. So first up, Wally and Sarah, what was it like setting up a company remotely? Can you explain how you logistically manage this complicated audition process virtually with over 100 possible dancers who are interested in being in the production?
Well, I can say it was a learning curve, for sure. In the beginning, for the initial audition process, as you mentioned, there were a lot of people. And so it was a lot to juggle, even just logistically, of, compared to just a person being in front of you, suddenly you were getting like bits and pieces from that person, a photo and a video and another video and some words. And then everyone here on our side kind of looking through all these different parts and trying to figure out what, you're trying to reach a conclusion, and what is the conclusion you're trying to reach? How are you reading all of this? But I think that as things progressed, things definitely got more streamlined, and you just had a stronger sense of like what was on the other end, and the effect of what words you put out from our end, and how that affects what you might get back, and when you're giving too much information, when you need to give more information. I think that was, learned along the way.
Yeah, I'd say it took a lot longer to get to know people, like both on the working side, because I'm here in Philadelphia, so the New York side of the team I hadn't met before. And if you're not in a room with the people, it takes longer to get to know them, like getting these videos back and forth from the performers, and hearing emails from them and questions from them and getting text messages about what they were concerned about or didn't understand or were excited about. It was definitely like a different experience than being in the room with somebody where you can read their facial expressions, where you can get, a sense of their energy. And even really simple logistics like, okay, 25 performers each need a folding black chair. Like logistics just became so much more complicated with everyone being spread out and neighborhood house being closed down and all of it happening remotely.
David, how did you decide who you wanted in the work? What kind of performer were you looking for?
I'm not very good at auditions. I don't like them. I don't like a lot of people in the room with tags on them with a number, and um, so I avoid them as much as possible. And with great frequency, I ask some people I know and have worked with who may be going to be in what I'm working on, who else they would like to work with and who they think I would like to work with. And so I meet people who arrive in the studio, and in a short period of time, I determine if we can get along with each other in some fashion and agree that we will try. So in this instance, and I have this thing called a pickup company, which is a legal entity, which means I can have the number of people I need for a project and can afford to pay. And so all of gathering a group of people was not unusual. The circumstance was unusual, but I read every single one of the auditioners' material that they sent in. I read the letter they wrote. I looked at their resume. And then I did something that I do in a kind of way at other times. I depended upon Wally and I depended upon Karen to what they knew about any of these dancers. And in this instance, I had the added knowledge of Jorg, who knew some of the dancers and who knew things about the space they were showing me they were working in. And so I had a lot of information coming from those people. And Wally and Karen love dancers, and they love the way they move, and they love what they submit. And all of that is really good for me because I don't understand any of it. And so I took their advice about a great many of the people, and only after I was very shocked to discover there were about 100 applicants. I thought there'd be about 22. And so at some point in this process, because Wally and Karen very particularly were saying, well, this person sent this, but maybe they could do this, or maybe if they had other information, they could do this. And they were sort of interesting at that. And at some point, about 2 weeks through the rehearsal process, I began to say, okay, but who do you really like? Who would you like to have be working with all the rest of this time? And I took their advice until we whittled it down to the 26 people that we whittled it down to. But I wouldn't say that it was a process that you could depend upon another time.
I also think it's important to say that it took a month to do as opposed to over several days that you could do it in a studio.
Right.
There was a lot of back and forth, and we had something called callbacks, which David and Wally and Ed and Karen organized. And so it took a month.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of what we ended up depending on was not dissimilar to an audition process, in that we were looking for and paying attention to people's choices, how they choose to approach the material, where they did the material, where they chose to do it, the angles they chose to do it, the way they put the camera, and when we would ask for a callback, what did they decide then? And you start to get a sense of a person and how their body approaches the movement. And so that was not dissimilar. It just took a lot longer than normal, for sure.
It was also very interesting to see, because everybody was photographing themselves, or most of them were photographing themselves and sending what they were sending to us, the number of people whose heads weren't in their tape or their feet weren't in their tape. And so the first things we asked for when we asked for callback information was, could we see what you look like? Could we see your whole body? Could we, et cetera, et cetera. So we began to have a sense of, bit by bit, of who everybody was, and simultaneously, as I have been in recent years, I was very interested in the fact that the company of people that we would arrive at would be various ages. Everybody wouldn't be very young. They would be various techniques and various races and various, and it was determined very early on that there were clearly going to be a great many less men than women, which is not unusual in the dance audition world in general. And so how were we going to deal with that in relation to the number of people we chose?
And you were also part of the audition process. Can you talk a little bit about what you brought to the table?
I think my role or my participation in that process came a little bit later. I think after the initial round of 100 was already whittled down to a hand or two handfuls. I think that's when I participated in the conversation. And I think it's what we already alluded to. It wasn't so much, it was partially looking at how performers were treating the material, but we also, in some sense, auditioned people's ability to photograph themselves and video themselves. So that played a strong role in selecting who we ended up with. And yeah, to our surprise and delight, it was a lot of material that we didn't expect that was coming in really refreshing ways. So we're like, this is definitely a person that has a sense of where they are and how they film themselves, and we would like to include them partially for that aspect.
So if we move to the rehearsal process, Wally and or David or Karen, if you all want to jump in, and can you explain how you interacted with dancers and how you processed all of the material that you were receiving? Like, can you really talk to us about nuts and bolts?
Wally, talk about nuts and bolts.
All right. Well, sorry. All right. There were a lot of nuts and bolts. There are a lot of parts, a lot of moving parts. So we might be all on Zoom together, and David has ideas about, we could ask this person to do this, and we could ask this person to do this, and I would love to see everyone doing this, and So there was a lot of, okay, we like some of that spontaneity that might be able to happen in the studio. I hadn't thought about that before, but I think maybe that was less possible in this situation, because then you had to actually construct the message that was then going to be sent out to the other end. And then you were going to wait a little while and see how that message was read and what they're going to send back to you. And then like a week has gone by and you realize, oh, maybe that wasn't the right message. I need to say this. So it really kept on developing. And I think there was a lot of needing to do that at first, would you say?
But we also began by sending people a 4.5 minute or a 5 minute dance section in which we said, choose any 2 minutes, and anywhere from the beginning, the middle, at the end, whatever you want, choose 2 minutes and send us back what you think you're looking at. And so we began to have a sense not only of what people were physically capable of doing, but what choice they were making in the material, and how they were using the material to send back to us. So we were finding out things about, as well as technique, we were finding out about taste and about response to an open process. And that was very interesting. And then when we wanted to add to that, we asked for another minute of that material, before it or after it, and include what you sent before, but now do more than you sent before. And how many days will it take to get this 2 hours or 3 hours or 4 hours of work to show us what you can do in 4 hours? So we were finding out about choices and time and energy and the locations that people were working in. We were auditioning a lot of things at once.
Yeah, and we would sometimes send a few notes to people after seeing a chunk of video and noticing maybe something particular that was missing. We would send notes. For instance, with chair, a large important note was that your chair is your partner. It's not just a prop. And that changes how the dancers can really think about it. Some of them have probably already thought that, but some of them hadn't. So that really transforms how you approach this object. And in song and dance, parallel position is really important. Pay attention to where your feet are parallel and where they're not, and your position in relation to the front, the quote unquote front of the space. So we sent notes like that, kind of more specific and also more just about the work itself, and that would influence what people would send back from time to
And
time.
also, Jorg became very important at this point because it was very useful for him to begin to suggest camera angles when people sent it back. What was their relation to front? What was their relation to the space they were in? And so we were then auditioning not only how they worked on the material, what material they chose, but how they followed direction in relation to the camera.
And I was also struck by the amazing locations that some of the performers chose in which to film themselves. Was that a directorial choice, or was that just some happy accident that happened that folks just found these really fascinating places to film themselves?
At first, we weren't saying what kind of space, just whatever space you were in. But when Jorg became involved with it, which was very important, he knew a lot about the spaces that various people were working in and about what could be possible, so that he began to specify certain spaces. And then also at some point, we sent out some kind of message which said, surprise us. And they did.
It was wonderful.
Yeah, also, I just want to say one thing about that it was, but for the most part, I'd say it was not heavily curated. And some of the magical spaces that you might have seen people in, it was not a request to go do it in that intersection or that part of Philly. Those things really came from the performers. And
Yes.
there were really just a few, at some point, there were a few very specific, as the work began to be put together, where David asked specifically, he wanted to have the opportunity to have see everyone in green, in a green space. Like that was a specific request. Or we would say outdoors, if you can do an outdoors and an indoors. If you can't, fine, and you could just stay indoors. There was no curation of what kind of indoors, or so you might, as an example, see in the finished work, something, the section that happens in the white rooms. It wasn't a request to do things in a white room. It was more of after they sent material back, David and Jorg are looking at it. It's like, oh, look, there's 6 people who are dancing in a white room. It becomes a part of what they were working with. Jorg, did you have something?
I just wanted to add, because the original question was about the rehearsal process, and as you might be able to gather from the answers, there was really no rehearsal. It was really very much treated like a continuation of the audition, in that sense that we asked for, can you provide us more material of that or versions of this material, and gave some of the specifications, whether indoor or outdoor. But basically, whatever we got became part of the piece and was free for us to be used, to be included in the final piece. But there was never sort of a, can we try that section again? Or, so it wasn't in any way any kind of traditional sense of a rehearsal process.
David, can you talk a little bit about the script?
Well, I thought about that. I saw that question was going to be asked. And I thought a lot about this afternoon. And I'm going to take a little time to tell you that I come from a very superstitious family background. And in my family, if you find out that you're going to have a baby, you don't buy anything for that baby until that baby is born. On the day the baby is born and is going to be okay and be able to leave the hospital, you go and buy a crib and all the rest of whatever it is you might need to bring that baby home, because it's dangerous in my grandmother's eyes to prepare for something God may not give you. And my sense of dealing with a script is it is an almost non-existent item that I have to have in order to get some money, get some people behind it, get some people to work on it. But it is non-existent in that in the first 3 days of rehearsal, something might happen that change everything in that script. And I am ready for it to be changed at any moment. I am ready for all or any of it to disappear and be rewritten and be reformed in some fashion relative to who came in the audition and in fact would be better doing this part than another person. So the part needs to be changed and what's happening in it needs to be changed. I was not prepared for the fact in this instance, working with Jorg for the first time, that Jorg would go off with the script and do something that took him 5 hours of very difficult labor and arrive back with it the next day as I was sitting with the script, changing everything in it because of what I had discovered we had and didn't have. And so Jorg and I would have great difficulty with each other because he liked what he had done and I was no longer interested in doing the same thing that I was interested in doing yesterday. And so we had to find out how to work with each other, which was not easy for either of us.
Well put. Thank you, David.
You could also call that, I think what they call it is parallel play.
So on that note, can
What is that note?
would Jorg and David talk about how you work together to edit the film or their I keep calling it a performance because to me it felt like a performance, but it was a film.
We just had a very big fight every week, and at various times I quit.
Well, I'm glad you didn't. Jorg?
I'm glad we didn't either. Yes, so if I could describe it, one strong, so how to put it, one strong guidance or one strong tool that I felt from early on was really instrumental in putting this together was, for me, was David's way of working with collages. It's actually one of the very first things that David shared with me. Even back in where was it actually? It was long before we even knew how we would work with all this. David shared his sort of word stream of consciousness kind of like collages where one word leads to the next, and then that one leads to the next, and it all gets arranged in these very meticulously put together PDFs. And I thought that was a really strong component or a strong idea for how to make this work on this level. So collage was kind of the guiding principle for all of this. And as you could probably, I had a conversation with somebody earlier today, and I was reminiscing on the fact that in all of those 58 minutes, I think we only have 3 or 4 actual cuts in a typical like film kind of edit way, because everything else is moving in and out and through constantly. And that's kind of how I imagine it from the beginning, that this is a little bit of a journey through David's mind that's inhabited by 26 dancers from Philadelphia that live in the now. So I think the process for me started with taking what we got and putting it next to each other, and we would spend, so the actual process happened that David and I would spend in the beginning 4 hours each day together with Alyce and Ed and Wally in the office, and sometimes Karen, and we would look at the footage, the pieces of footage we got, and what might work next to one another, and how we go from one to the next. And so we explored a couple things, and then I would go off in these 5-hour nightly work sessions, and then come back with something that grew out of that. And that's where sort of our difficulty sometimes arose, that I went one way and David was like, that's not the way I want to go at all. And then we had to change the path.
But I should also add to what Jorg is saying, that a major element in this work as it appears now is about the amazing creative finesse that Jorg has and knows how to deal with, of gathering the various performers in their various spaces at their various times in the material, and finding very eloquent ways in which they seem to be dancing simultaneously in all their separate ways, but forming a company. And I think that a most important element of what became the result of all of this is the fact that Jorg was the person who turned all the various pieces of material that we had from various people into something that became a whole, became an entity on its own. And always that was very amazing to me, and what I wanted to enforce it by virtue of then when we left it and when we started something else, because I was moving through this entire hour of whatever this was going to be, in some way trying to figure out what would not be anticlimactical, what would be sensible to be next, what would be logical to be next, and when we had to leave something and go to the next thing. Whereas what I encountered was that many of the things that Jorg was doing, which were eloquent and in fact the essence of what we were doing, I thought I needed to be out of here and on my way to the next thing sooner or later than he thought we needed to be out of there, because he was actually exploring his process in a kind of way that was, well, gorgeous. And I recognized the gorgeousness of it, but I also know when I'm working alone with 19 dancers, that some people are falling in love with what we did yesterday, and I'm already thinking that what we did yesterday is twice as long as it should be, because we need to move on to the something else. And that was part of what we encountered with each other.
2020 has been.
I would work with him again in a minute if it were possible.
Great. 2020 has been a nightmare of a year for all of us. And I'm just wondering if there was anything delightful that came out of this process that you didn't expect, or something unusual or something beautiful. Obviously the work is beautiful, but we're talking about process here. So was there anything that surprised you or amazed you that could uplift us in this difficult year that we're having?
Are you talking to me still?
I'm talking to the whole creative team.
Oh, good.
I mean, you all are so experienced and have worked in so many different places and cities and times. I mean, what does it mean to be making work in a pandemic? Has there been anything that's really changed or made you feel differently about how you're creating work or how you might create work in the future?
Well, I can speak to, well, several things. I think that the dancers from Philly, the performers and dancers from Philly were very inspiring for all of us, that they really just leaped right into this process. And in the beginning, you have to remember, this was kind of very early on. So even, you know, going outside to perform something is going to feel like a little weird and potentially risky. And so, and then much less being inside. So it was, I think it was very inspiring to see how people just went at it and made really interesting choices, taught themselves this work. Like, we were not there to say, you know, that's not right in that moment and get them steered in the right direction. They were doing this really so much on their own. That was very inspiring in this atmosphere, in this situation. And I think anytime you can focus on making something in a crisis is helpful and a beautiful a beautiful thing to be doing and focusing on. And I was very grateful to be a part of it right now, for sure. And being able to even, you know, do a duet with Wally in a mask, you know, it's like, there's probably 2 or 3 people I would feel comfortable doing that with. And Wally is one of them. So I got lucky.
Great.
I think you had to completely alter the logistical model to deal with the distance, and so, and also the pace of making it is therefore different. In a normal rehearsal process, and but it is every bit as intense, and you have to. I mean, usually in a live performance, you start with the opening night and planning, and then you work backwards. And this was a little different because there was no methodology, you know, that was clear to go about doing this. We were fortunate that the team that we had, you know, working on it, everyone rose to the occasion in a really amazing way. Ed Fitzgerald, who's not here, who's normally our stage manager and is an associate producer on this, did a great deal of work working with David to prepare the material that would go out to the dancers. Wally would spent, I can't tell you how much time going back and forth with the dancers and really being a rehearsal director and an assistant. I mean, he had multiple hats. Karen had that role as well. And I do have to say that if we had not had our wonderful archive in place, which was funded by the Mellon Foundation, we would not have been able to do this work. That was the fact that the way we structured our the pickup company and David, we structured the archive. So we have copies of everything. We have access to all of his work, and therefore we can access things, you know, freely. And that's a profound advantage when you go and deal with a project like this. So there was the Pickup Performance Company family, there was the Christchurch family, and then there was the Fringe family, and then, you know, it was sort of everybody merged and did their best to work at a distance, and we were very lucky.
And I also add that things I did not think about to begin with. When the first tapes arrived, we were looking at what the choices various people were making about where they were doing it or what choices they did or did not have. And we were looking at what choices they wore, what did they choose to work in. And eventually, not long after that first batch of tapes began to arrive, I asked that everybody be wearing black so that what we had we were gathering a group of people who were all working in different ways in different places, but they now shared something. They all were wearing something that was similar or the same. And then it occurred to me that if I put a black metal folding chair in everybody's space, that now wherever they were, there was going to be one common thing everybody shared, and it would be the object that would eventually be part of the chair piece. So we were in a kind of way building in relation to what we were receiving, building the method of turning this into a visually sharing group. And that was a very important part of what got to be very useful. And at some point very early on, maybe in the middle of July, as we were starting to deal with where things were arriving from, and the first of the green outdoor spaces were arriving. And at some point when Jorg began to put things together, the green spaces were dropping into the white spaces, and I was beginning to have the sense that we were having sections, that there were empty white spaces, that there were very full apartments, full of furniture and objects, that there were outdoor spaces, and what kind of outdoor spaces, decks or actually places on the avenue, and that there were the parks, and that maybe we wanted to be dividing this material up in the course of the hour so that we could go to a whole nother space for a whole nother section, rather than have them all intermingled in some fashion. And that was just trying to use the things we were getting in some way to their advantage.
And now we could open up for questions for those of you who are here with us today. I know there's some amazing dance people, so I hope we could get some questions. If you would like to submit them through the chat function, I can read them off, and you can, if you could let us know who you'd like to ask the question to as well.
I just wanted to add one thing. Now that I'm finally unmuted, I kept on trying to, but I was muted again and again. Well, it's both in response to your question, Barbara, and also a bit of a clarification in case people are wondering, and you were asking about the nuts and bolts. And I just want to be really clear that the dancers, as Karen said, I mean, great fearlessness, but they got an email with a request, and that's what it was called. We would call it a request. And it would be about, pay attention to use the highest quality on your camera setting, try to have your whole body in the frame. In the beginning, I don't think we said anything about indoor, outdoor. Is about wearing black. When the chairs arrived, it was about having the chair in the space with you. It was very nuts and bolts. And then it would be about learn 2 minutes of chair in the beginning, any 2 minutes. And I think maybe there were just a couple lines that like Karen provided, David provided, about what to pay attention to in chair. There was no rehearsal direction. That was it. I communicated with them via email.
At some point, Wally, we said, could you do the 2 minutes in a minute and a half?
Yeah. And so you send that out there, and then they did whatever they did. Oh, and we'd also give them amount of time, take this amount of time to work on this. So they were each of them were their own rehearsal directors. And in response to your question, for me, I commented in the editing studio, I commented the other night when the cast had a premiere party watching, that when I started seeing what David and Jorg were putting together with the dancers in their individual, spaces now all together on the screen, I was seeing a beautiful dancing together, and I was really seeing individuals and really seeing what each person thought was important about their material, like how they perceived it, what they thought it was all about, or what was, yeah, what mattered. And I could really see what mattered to each of them. And then they were all sharing the same space on the screen now. And there was this level of like amplification and togetherness with all these individuals that was much greater for me than what I often experience in a dance studio when dancers are all together in the same space. That there was a real like fearlessness, a vulnerability, like people really exposing what they thought, you know, mattered. And it was very enlightening and inspiring to me.
We have some questions coming up in the chat function. Wendy wants to know about the dog. Who and how did it happen to catch that dog running back and forth?
Again, a happy accident. This came in from Rebecca, from her submission. She, I can only assume, lives nearby the woods, and submitted a couple of videos with her doing chair in this part of the sort of surrounding forest, her home. And I believe the dog is not hers. So this is somebody walking by in the background in the path that sort of forks off of the path that she's performing chair on. And the dog just noticed somebody down the path, runs over, circles her, very excited. We can hear sort of faintly the owner of the dog calling the dog back. And the dog goes, okay, I gotta go run back. And so that was one of those things that we thought it's just too good not to include. So then I cropped out the dog, had the dog reveal Rebecca dancing the chair piece, and David ended up liking it, so it stayed in it.
Well, also what happened is early on, Shayla's child walked into the frame of what she was doing. And my first reaction when I saw it was, well, I guess we'll have to edit that. And then my second reaction was, why would you edit that? In fact, find out if there are any more kids around. And so I was learning from what I was receiving, what about it was could enter this material in a way it never could have in live performance.
And we have another question from Dawn, who says she's curious about the initial vision of the work before the pandemic arose.
I guess that's me. There was supposed to be two companies functioning simultaneously, one in New York and one in Philadelphia. And I was supposed to be commuting between the two rehearsal times in the course of the week, and then somehow building a piece in which the people in New York would be streamed live into the Philadelphia live performance.
And the rehearsal.
And the rehearsal. And I'm telling you that without in any way knowing how it was going to be able to happen, and if it was going to be able to happen, and what I had to do to make it happen, had no idea about any of that. So that when I had the idea to have no idea about something else, it wasn't so frightening or shocking because I had no idea about the original thing.
From Patsy, working in this different video way, how did you know it was done? And did you see this work having other lives after this?
Who wants to take that one? I guess it was done because I know it was done because
we had no more time and no more money. We had more time and more money. We could have made it be something slightly else. And that, I think, is the case for anything that you make. How many people are repainting their paintings because they still have them around and nobody's bought it and it isn't in the show yet and you thought of something else to do with it.
And I just want to add that Patsy is our archivist.
Right.
So.
Being done just seems so antithetical to your work, David. I mean, your work, in my experience, is so evolving. And so I really, like, it's so interesting to me to think about it in this video way where, like, there is this very finite, finished aspect.
Well, one of the things that happened in this piece is that originally it was going to be one whole something. In the course of it, I was doing what I do these days a lot, which is watching episodes of shows on cable television and streaming them in some way that I don't have to wait till next week to see what happens tomorrow. And so I said, why aren't we doing episodes? We could do 4 episodes of 15 minutes each, and these would be these 4 pieces. And then in the course of that, I said, why are we doing 4 minutes, 15-minute pieces? One of the things I've already done in the world is make something called 10-minute TV. What if we're making 6 things and it's going to be 10 minutes each? Or what if we're making 3 things and they're going to be 20 minutes each? Or what version of this do we really want to be doing? And then in the course of that, we put everything in some order. And in the course of that order and working on that order, it became clear to me that close-up should not be the first piece of the evening. First piece of the evening should be song and dance because we would meet everybody. And in close-up, we would only meet a very few people. So that didn't seem like a good idea. So now that got changed in the last 10 days of work, of editing. We started to move those things into those positions. And who knows what would have happened if we had more time and if Jorg and I didn't kill each other.
Well, we didn't,
Okay.
but I do want to add that that's one of the things that we realized, that it's such a complex puzzle piece that it really is what it is because of the time that we had, and the material would easily lead us down 5 more paths that would create 5 completely different pieces out of the material that we have. So it's an impossible answer to question. When we knew that was done, it was really just like we got all the material in by the time of the premiere. And we were happy with it.
Okay, I have one more question here. And it's a little bit of a long question, so let me read it. Lindsay says, David, I first met you when you gave a master class in Paris in 1984 or 85, and it was the best class they ever took. And they committed to self at the time, the observation and knowingness that we create our reality as much as our reality creates us. They took this with them for the next 3+ decades. How is the Philadelphia matter any different than any work you've ever done?
Well, it isn't. It isn't different. It's the thing that's different is when we did a year before, we did a MoMA performance called the Matter at MoMA. And in the course of it, there was reference to archival material and new material made in relation to the archival material, and the program was put into a kind of order, and there were projections that happened in relation to it. It was a failed version in my mind because it turned out that the projections that I was having on the walls of MoMA turned out, although this was the Museum of Modern Art, turned out they couldn't actually project it so that it could be seen very well because they had fluorescent lights in the ceiling they couldn't turn on and off. So that turned out to be a difficult circumstance. So the thing that was better about this is we had Jorg, and his way of dealing with the projections that could occur in the course of what was being looked at, about sliding in images in back of people in their white spaces, about the kinds of miracles he could accomplish, made what I couldn't do at the Museum of Modern Art work better than I did there. But essentially, I have been making work about making work for a lot of years because I have nothing else to say except here's what it took to make this happen. Take a look at it. And that's what I do.
Okay, last question here. Can Jorg and maybe David say anything about choosing the styles of editing within the individual sections, i.e. the slanted framing in the green section, the approach to making architectural spaces meld or open out in some of the domestic sections, using Amalia's dance as a beginning and ending of the final section?
I think that's you, Jorg.
Sounds like it. Well, one thing that I think David and I figured out once we knew that we were going to divide this whole project into sections is that also the editing styles or the ways the collage comes together could be slightly different from section to section. So I think we actually started with chair, and I think we used some of the choreography, some of the geometry of the spaces that was sort of created around the performers to put them next to each other. So actually, I'm not sure now if I'm correct. Hey, Wally, can you help me with this? Did we start with, I think we did.
Dance. Song and dance first.
We started with song and dance, right? That's what we started with. Like the White Room was one of the earliest things that we discovered putting pieces together. And I think that's right. That's where we started in one program that wasn't actually allowing us to easily mask shapes other than squares. And we were just putting things next to each other and they were just sort of rectangular cutouts. And then early on, I was like, this is getting much more complicated than this one program could handle. And we decided to transfer everything over in a program that was much more powerful in terms of what you could do to it and how you could mask sort of a person out of their environment and put it next to another person that's masked out of their environment. And I think in the process of doing that, we discovered that people moving aren't always well framed in a rectangular shape. So that's when some of the garden section, especially because that's where we're trying to get everybody into the same outdoor green space. That's where we really tried to restrict the shape around the people to their movement. And that created a much more interesting collage. And in other sections, in chair, the ending section where Amalia started, we just thought Amalia was such a fascinating performance to watch because I know it was like right around the deadline, there was a big storm coming through Philadelphia. And we heard from some performers like, I can't do it because it's a rain. And then seeing Amalia going like, I'm doing this, it's full on raining. And it's just the most beautiful thing to watch. We kind of felt that was such a beautiful thing to base this performance on, that we started with and we ended with. And then I just figured out a few of the other people that had backgrounds or scenery that really lent itself to being incorporated. So when Lucas, for instance, is on the roof, which was one of his early audition submissions that we thought, could you go back to this roof? Because that was just beautiful when he did it the first time. And he ended up sending a very high quality version of that on the roof, which was good enough quality to actually key the background out of. And Dawn also, like Dawn's beautiful, the end of the Ben Franklin Bridge, which I knew had this big key sculpture underneath. And it was such an iconic shot for Philadelphia to be included. So those things kind of lent themselves into incorporating or sort of merging this architecture of this piece.
What did I just say about Amalia and the rain? Valda and I did chair for a couple of years, and we did it in a lot of places. And one of the places we did it was a gallery in Portland, Oregon, in which the ceiling was leaking. and there were big buckets on the floor everywhere we were working that were filling with water from the leaking ceiling as we performed Chair. And we also did it at the Berkeley Museum, where on Tuesdays, they neglected to tell us, they waxed the marble floor. So we came in to do it and slid our way across the space and said, I guess we'll have to try it a little slower in here today. So doing it in the rain only made me smile and smile and think how lovely and brave that woman is to just continue to do this no matter what is happening. And it seemed inevitably wonderful that Jorg would then make it be the entire circumstance of the last section, and everybody else would enter and exit as she kept going from beginning to end. It was logical.
Great. Well, I think that's the end of our session here. I thank everyone from the Philadelphia Matter 1972-2020, the creative team, and David Gordon for all of your amazing work. We are going to be having another talk back next Saturday, September 26th, where Patsy Gay, Valda Setterfield, and Suzanne Carbonneau will discuss how the Matter has functioned as an archive for his practice. So that's next Saturday at 3 o'clock. And we hope that you'll join us then. But in the meantime, thank you so much. And please go watch the Philadelphia Matter if you haven't already. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.